Captain Kang Dae-yun stood in the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel, watching the massive council station grow larger in the viewport. His hands were steady, but his heart raced with anticipation. 30 years of exploration, decades of peaceful contact with dozens of alien species, and countless hours of preparation had led to this moment. Earth was finally getting its chance to join the Galactic Council. Beside him, Dr. Park Nari reviewed her notes one last time. She was humanity's chief xenobiologist and had spent years studying council cultures, learning their customs and understanding their values. Her optimism was infectious, and even the usually cautious Lieutenant Han Ji-woo seemed excited about their mission. The station itself was breathtaking. It orbited a neutron star called Axion 7, and its structure defied human engineering principles. Crystalline towers spiraled outward from a central sphere, each one glowing with different colors. Ships of every imaginable design docked at various ports, some small as shuttles, others large as cities. When their vessel finally docked, a council escort met them. The aliens were tall, slender beings with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors like oil on water. They guided the human delegation through corridors filled with species from across the galaxy. Dae-yun saw beings made of living crystal, clouds of sentient gas contained in force fields, and creatures that looked like walking trees. The council chambers took his breath away. The room was a massive sphere where representatives floated in designated zones, held in place by gravity manipulation technology. Hundreds of species were present, their forms and voices creating a symphony of diversity. At the center floated the council arbiter, Velmuth, an ancient being from the quill species that resembled a combination of bird and reptile. Dae-yun stepped forward to the speaking platform. His voice was transmitted throughout the chamber in dozens of languages simultaneously. He spoke of Earth, of humanity's journey from a single world to a spacefaring civilization. He talked about human art, music, and literature. He showed them recordings of Earth's oceans, mountains, and cities. He presented scientific achievements, peaceful first contacts, and the treaties humanity had signed with neighboring species. Dr. Nari followed with a presentation on human biology and culture. She explained how humans valued diversity, how they had overcome wars and divisions to unite under a single planetary government. She spoke of human curiosity, their drive to explore and learn, and their deep desire to contribute to the galactic community. Lieutenant Ji-woo presented humanity's military capabilities with pride but also restraint. He emphasized that Earth's defenses were purely protective, that humanity sought peace but was prepared to defend itself if necessary. He showed advanced but not aggressive technology. Careful not to appear threatening, when the presentations ended, Velmuth announced that the council would deliberate. The human delegation was escorted to guest quarters to wait. The accommodations were comfortable but strange, designed for species with different environmental needs. Dae-yun found it difficult to sleep that first night, his mind racing with possibilities. 3 days passed. Dae-yun and his team reviewed their presentations countless times, wondering if they should have said something different, shown something else. Nari remained optimistic, pointing out that a long deliberation meant the council was taking humanity seriously. View was less certain, noting that some species had given the humans hostile looks during the presentations. On the 4th day, they were summoned back to the chambers. The atmosphere felt different this time, heavier somehow. Velmuth floated at the center, his feathers arranged in a formal pattern that Nari had learned indicated serious judgment. The arbiter's voice filled the chamber, translated into human language through their communication devices. He spoke of the council's careful consideration of the many factors they had weighed. He acknowledged humanity's achievements and potential. Then came the word that shattered their hopes. Denied? Dae-yun felt his stomach drop. Nari's face went pale. Even Ji-woo, trained to hide his emotions, looked shocked. Velmuth continued speaking. The council had decided that humanity was not ready for membership. Their history showed too much violence, too many wars. Human society still struggled with inequality and conflict. Their expansion into space had been rapid, driven by competition and resource acquisition rather than harmonious exploration. The Council feared that admitting humanity would destabilize the careful balance they had maintained for 10,000 years, but the worst was yet to come. Velmuth announced the quarantine directive. Humanity would be restricted to their own solar system. No human ships could travel beyond the designated boundary. Any vessels that crossed the line would be destroyed without warning. The Council would revisit humanity's application in 500 years, giving them time to mature and evolve beyond their aggressive tendencies. Daeyeon found his voice, stepping forward despite protocol. He argued that humanity had changed, that they had proven themselves peaceful in every first contact. He pointed out that many Council species had violent histories too, that evolution and growth should be encouraged, not punished. His protests were met with silence. Several Council members turned away, dismissing him without words. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Only a few species, including the Velians, seemed sympathetic, but they were outnumbered and overruled. Dr. Nari tried a different approach, appealing to scientific cooperation. She offered to share human research, to establish educational exchanges, to work together on projects that could benefit everyone. Her proposals were declined. The decision was final. The human delegation was escorted back to their ship under guard. The journey back felt completely different from the arrival. The same corridors that had filled Daeyeon with wonder now felt cold and hostile. The same aliens who had seemed fascinating now appeared indifferent or contemptuous. As their ship undocked and began the journey back to the boundary, Lieutenant Jiwoo monitored their sensors carefully. Something caught his attention. Multiple Council ships were watching their departure, more than necessary for a simple escort. Encrypted communications were bouncing between several species, hidden behind complex codes. He brought this information to Daeyeon, who stared at the data with tired eyes. Whatever those species were discussing, it was beyond human ability to decode. But Jiwoo's instincts told him something else was happening. Something the Council was not sharing with humanity. The ship crossed the boundary, passing through a network of automated defense satellites that formed an invisible wall around human space. These satellites were ancient Council technology, impossible to bypass or destroy. They would detect any human vessel that tried to leave and eliminate it instantly. Daeyeon stood at the viewport, watching the Council station shrink into the distance. 50 years of his life had been dedicated to this moment, and it had ended in rejection and imprisonment. Earth had reached for the stars, and the stars had pushed them away. He thought about how to deliver this news to Earth, to the billions who had hoped for a brighter future among the galactic community. How do you tell your entire species that they are not good enough, not civilized enough, not worthy enough to join the rest of the galaxy? Behind him, Nari was quietly crying. Jiwoo was still studying the sensor data, his jaw clenched in anger. The rest of the delegation sat in stunned silence. The journey home would take weeks. Daeyeon knew those weeks would be the longest of his life. 50 years had changed everything. Admiral Kim Hae-jin stood on the command deck of the defense station orbiting Mars, looking at displays that showed the transformed solar system. She had been just a child when Captain Daeyeon returned with news of humanity's rejection. That rejection had shaped her entire life. The solar system humanity now inhabited bore little resemblance to the one that had sent diplomats to the Council. Where there had been a few small stations, there were now massive orbital cities. Earth alone was surrounded by 17 habitat rings, each housing millions of people. Mars had been fully terraformed, its red surface now spotted with blue oceans and green continents. Even Venus had colonies floating in its upper atmosphere. The asteroid belt had become an industrial center, with mining operations extracting resources at rates that would have seemed impossible 50 years ago. Jupiter's moons hosted research facilities and military bases. The Kuiper Belt, once empty and ignored, now bristled with defense platforms and sensor arrays. Humanity's population had exploded to 40 billion people, spread across dozens of settlements. Without access to other worlds beyond the solar system, humans had been forced to use every resource within their reach. They had become masters of efficiency and innovation out of pure necessity. Admiral Hae-jin commanded the United Earth Defense Fleet, the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. 3,000 warships of various classes, from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts, patrolled the solar system constantly. Every citizen underwent basic combat training. Every station had emergency protocols. Humanity had transformed into a fortress, waiting for a threat they knew would eventually come. In a secure laboratory deep beneath the surface of Europa. Dr. Cho Minho worked on technologies that pushed the boundaries of known science. His Phoenix Initiative had been running for 30 years, funded by every government in the solar system. The goal was simple: make humanity so advanced that the Council could never threaten them again. Minho's team had achieved things the Council claimed were impossible. They had cracked quantum entanglement communication, allowing instant messages across any distance. They had mastered zero-point energy extraction, providing unlimited clean power. Most impressive was their neural link technology, which allowed human pilots to connect directly with their ships. Merging human intuition with machine precision. In an unmarked office on Earth's moon, Sora directed the Shadow Network, humanity's intelligence agency focused on the galaxy beyond their prison. Her agents had spent decades studying every piece of information they could gather about the Council and its member species. They captured and analyzed probe drones that occasionally came too close to the boundary. They intercepted communications. They built a picture of galactic politics from fragments and whispers. What Sora had learned was disturbing. The galaxy was not the peaceful paradise the Council claimed it to be. A species called the Ravath Swarm had been consuming worlds on the outer rim of the galaxy for 20 years. They were biological nightmares, living ships that absorbed matter and energy, growing stronger with every victim. Entire civilizations had been wiped out. The Council was struggling to contain the swarm, losing battles more often than winning them. Several member species had been completely destroyed, their worlds left as dead husks. But the Council kept this information secret, not wanting to admit their weakness or cause panic among their citizens. Even more interesting to Sora was the political situation within the Council itself. A faction led by the Velian Commonwealth had been arguing for years that humanity should be freed from quarantine. The Velians pointed out that human military innovations could help fight the swarm, that humanity had proven themselves peaceful during 50 years of isolation, and that the quarantine was morally wrong. But the Velians were consistently outvoted by conservative species who still feared humanity's potential for violence. Some council members even suggested that humanity might be better off destroyed, eliminated before they became a serious threat. These discussions were kept secret, but Sora's network had uncovered them anyway. Admiral Hyjin reviewed this intelligence regularly, and it fueled her determination. She ran constant war games, testing every scenario she could imagine. She pushed her fleet to train harder, to innovate faster, to be ready for anything. Some called her paranoid, but she called it prepared. Dr. Minho thought she was too focused on military solutions. He believed that if humanity could achieve technological supremacy, the Council would have no choice but to accept them. Sora thought they were both missing the point. The real power, she argued, was information and influence, not weapons or inventions. Despite their differences, all three worked toward the same goal, ensuring humanity's survival and freedom. They coordinated through Admiral Hyjin, who had the authority to direct military, scientific, and intelligence resources as needed. Then came the day that changed everything. An alarm rang through the defense network, signaling a council ship breaching the boundary. Admiral Hyjin rushed to her command center, expecting an attack. Instead, sensors showed a single vessel, badly damaged and leaking atmosphere. The ship was Velian, its hull torn open by weapons that burned with organic energy signatures. Swarm weapons. The vessel was sending a distress signal, requesting immediate assistance. Its crew was dying. Hyjin faced an impossible choice in seconds. Part of her wanted to let them die, to pay back the Council's cruelty with indifference. They had left humanity to rot in isolation for 50 years. Why should humans risk themselves to save Council members now? But another part of her, the part that still believed in the values Captain Dayan had presented to the Council so long ago, knew what the right answer was. If humanity wanted to prove they were better than the Council claimed, they had to act with honor even when it was difficult. She ordered rescue operations. Human ships swarmed the Velian vessel, cutting through twisted metal to reach survivors. Medical teams worked frantically to save aliens, whose biology they barely understood. Dr. Minho's lab provided technology that stabilized the ship's failing systems. They saved 17 Velians out of a crew of 34. The ship's captain, Chancellor Baikun, was among the survivors, though he was severely injured. As medical teams worked on him, he kept trying to speak, insisting he had a message for humanity's leaders. When he was finally stable enough, Admiral Haijin visited him in the medical bay. Baikun was a tall, elegant being with silver skin and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern. Even injured and weak, he carried himself with dignity. His message was delivered in a voice barely above a whisper, but every word hit like a hammer. The Ravath swarm had changed course. They were heading toward the solar system, attracted by humanity's industrial signatures and energy outputs. The swarm would arrive in approximately 6 months. Worse still, the Council knew this was happening. The swarm's projected path had been calculated weeks ago. The Council had held votes on whether to warn humanity or help defend them. The majority voted no. Some Council members saw the swarm as a convenient solution to their human problem. If the swarm destroyed humanity, the Council could avoid the moral complications of lifting the quarantine or the political problems of keeping it in place. Baikun had disagreed with this decision so strongly that he had stolen a ship and attempted to warn humanity himself. Council forces had intercepted him, damaging his vessel in the process. He had barely made it through the boundary before his ship failed completely. He looked at Admiral Haijin with his 3 eyes and spoke words she would never forget. The Council, he said, had become corrupt and cowardly. They had abandoned their own principles in favor of political convenience. But not all Council species agreed with the majority. The Velians, along with the Thrin, the Nari, and the Corven, were willing to help humanity, even if it meant defying the Council itself. It was not much help, he admitted. 4 species could not send their full fleets without triggering civil war within the Council. But they could provide intelligence, some ships, and technological assistance. It was better than nothing, and it was offered with genuine respect and regret for the Council's failures. Admiral Haijin listened to all of this and felt cold determination settle over her. 6 months to prepare for an enemy that had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than humanity. 6 months to ready defenses against a foe that the entire Galactic Council struggled to fight. 6 months to prove that humanity deserved to exist. She thanked Chancellor Baikun for his warning and his courage, then returned to her command center. There was work to do. The solar system transformed into a war machine in 6 months. Every resource, every person, every moment was dedicated to one goal: survival. Admiral Haijin barely slept, coordinating efforts across dozens of worlds and hundreds of stations. The defense plan she created was desperate but thorough. The asteroid belt became a massive minefield. Thousands of automated weapons platforms were hidden among the rocks, each programmed to activate when swarm ships entered range. The mines themselves were Dr. Minho's design, using zero-point energy cores that would explode with devastating force. Every orbital station around Earth, Mars, Venus, and the outer planets was armed. Railguns that could fire projectiles at a fraction of light speed were mounted on platforms that once served as warehouses and factories. Missile batteries covered every approach vector. Shield generators, some using technology borrowed from the Velians, created overlapping defensive layers. The United Earth Defense Fleet expanded to its maximum capacity. Every shipyard worked constantly, producing new vessels or upgrading existing ones. The 3,000 warships that existed before Baikun's warning grew to 4,500. They were not as advanced as Council ships, but they were human-made, built with creativity and determination. Commander Li Taijin led Ghost Squadron, an experimental unit using Dr. Minho's neural link technology. 43 pilots had been selected for the program, the best of the best, and they had trained for this moment. The neural link allowed them to control their fighters with thought alone, making decisions faster than any computer and executing maneuvers that would kill normal pilots. Taijin was young for a commander. Only 32, but he had proven himself in countless simulations. He was confident, some said arrogant, but his skill backed up his attitude. His pilots trusted him completely, and they needed that trust. The neural link was dangerous. It connected human minds to machines in ways that caused terrible headaches, sometimes seizures. Several pilots had died during testing, but those who survived became something new, something the galaxy had never seen. While military preparations continued, Ambassador Choi Yoonji made a decision that would change everything. She was young, only 27, and officially she was just a junior diplomat assigned to coordinate with the allied species. But Yoonji believed that humanity's survival depended on more than military might. They needed friends, allies, support beyond the 4 species Baekhyun had mentioned. Against Admiral Haijin's direct orders, Yoonji took a stealth ship and broke through the boundary. She knew it was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but she believed it was necessary. The ship's systems were designed to mask its energy signature, making it nearly invisible to the Council's detection network. Nearly, but not completely, she made it through and headed straight for Velian space. Chancellor Baekhyun had recovered enough to return home, and he had promised to help however he could. When Yoonji arrived at the Velian homeworld, she found a civilization built on honor and logic, their cities precise and beautiful. Baekhyun met with her immediately. He introduced her to representatives from the Thren, insectoid beings with complex social structures, the Nuri, aquatic creatures who communicated through bioluminescent patterns, and the Korven, silicon-based life forms that resembled living statues. These 4 species had formed a secret coalition, united by their disgust with the Council's decision to abandon humanity. They shared intelligence about the swarm, tactical data from previous battles, and information about swarm behavior patterns that could save countless lives. The Thren had experience with biological warfare and offered to help develop weapons that could attack the swarm's organic ships at the cellular level. The Nuri provided detailed analysis of swarm movement patterns they had observed in other systems. The Korven shared shield technology that could temporarily resist the swarm's ability to absorb matter and energy. More importantly, they promised to send what ships they could spare. It would not be much, perhaps 200 vessels total, but every ship would make a difference. They could not send more without revealing their defiance to the Council, which might trigger an internal war that would leave the entire galaxy vulnerable. Yoonji thanked them and gathered every piece of information she could. She prepared to return to Seoul with the Allied fleet, knowing that her defiance of orders would likely end her career. She did not care. Some things were more important than rules. Back in the solar system, the swarm arrived ahead of schedule. Long-range sensors detected them first, a massive fleet emerging from faster-than-light travel at the Kuiper Belt's edge. The numbers were terrifying. Hundreds of thousands of ships, each one a biological nightmare that looked like a cross between a sea creature and a diseased organ. The swarm ships were alive, truly alive. They grew and adapted, learning from each battle. Their hulls could regenerate damage. Their weapons were part of their bodies, firing concentrated streams of organic matter that dissolved anything they touched. They did not build ships. They bred them. Admiral Haijin gave the order to engage at maximum range. Human forces stationed at the Kuiper Belt activated their weapons, firing missiles and energy beams into the approaching swarm. Thousands of swarm ships died in the first volley, but tens of thousands remained, and they kept coming. The Battle of the Kuiper Belt began in earnest. Human warships engaged the swarm's vanguard among the icy objects at the solar system's edge. It was chaos, ships darting between rocks the size of mountains, weapons fire lighting up the darkness like a deadly light show. Commander Taijin and Ghost Squadron entered the battle and immediately proved their worth. The neural link gave them abilities that seemed impossible. They moved their fighters with perfect precision, dodging swarm attacks that should have hit them. They coordinated without speaking, each pilot knowing instinctively what the others would do. They attacked in patterns that confused the swarm's organic computers. In the first hour, Ghost Squadron destroyed over 400 swarm ships while losing only 2 of their own. The rest of the defense fleet watched in amazement. These pilots were superhuman or something close to it, and they gave humanity hope, but hope was not enough. The swarm adapted quickly, changing their tactics to counter Ghost Squadron's advantages. More importantly, the swarm's numbers were overwhelming. For every 10 ships humanity destroyed, 100 more took their place. The human forces began to fall back. Executing fighting retreats toward the inner solar system, Admiral Hyjin watched the battle displays and calculated their chances. They were losing, but losing slowly enough to make the swarm pay for every meter of space. The plan was to draw them into the prepared kill zones around Mars and Earth. Where the heaviest defenses waited, the retreat was carefully controlled, with ships taking turns engaging the swarm while others fell back to rearm and repair. The Thrin bioweapon was deployed, a spore-like substance that attacked swarm ships at the cellular level. It worked, causing swarm vessels to dissolve into organic sludge, but the swarm adapted to it within hours, developing immunity. After 3 days of constant fighting, the swarm reached the asteroid belt. The mines activated, exploding in brilliant flashes that destroyed thousands of swarm ships. But the swarm was learning. They sent smaller ships ahead to trigger the mines, sacrificing themselves so the larger vessels could pass through safely. Human casualties mounted. Entire squadrons were wiped out. Stations were overrun and had to be evacuated or destroyed to prevent them from being absorbed by the swarm. The Mars orbital defenses engaged. Railguns firing nonstop until their barrels glowed red-hot. Just when it seemed like humanity's last stand would happen at Mars, sensors detected new ships entering the system. Ambassador Yunji had returned with the Allied fleet. 217 vessels from 4 different species jumped in at the swarm's flank. Attacking with fresh weapons and full energy reserves, the Allied ships were more advanced than human vessels. Their weapons more effective against the swarm, the Corvan shields proved incredibly valuable, creating protective barriers that swarm ships could not easily penetrate. The Nari provided real-time tactical analysis, predicting swarm movements with impressive accuracy. The Thrin unleashed modified bioweapons that the swarm had never encountered before. Commander Taijin's Ghost Squadron linked up with Velian fighters, and together they created coordinated attacks that devastated swarm formations. The tide of battle shifted, not to victory, but to something humanity had not had before, a chance. Admiral Hyjin reorganized her forces, integrating the Allied ships into her battle plan. She sent encrypted thanks to Ambassador Yunji, silently acknowledging that the young diplomat's defiance had been the right choice. Together, human and alien forces made their stand. The battle raged across the entire solar system for 2 weeks. It was the longest, bloodiest conflict in human history, and every hour brought new horrors and new acts of heroism. Ships were destroyed by the hundreds. Millions of lives were lost. But humanity refused to surrender. Admiral Hyjin commanded from the flagship Indomitable, a massive dreadnought at the center of Earth's defensive sphere. She barely left the command deck, surviving on stimulants and sheer willpower. Her tactical decisions were studied and analyzed by every commander in the fleet, then executed with precision. She knew that one mistake could doom billions of people. The strategy was brutal but effective. Human and allied forces established a fighting retreat, pulling the swarm deeper into the solar system while maximizing casualties at every step. The goal was to make the swarm commit fully, to draw their entire force into the trap that had been prepared around Earth and Mars. Commander Taijin's Ghost Squadron became legendary during this phase of the battle. Their neural-linked fighters moved through space like schools of fish, perfect coordination making them deadlier than ships 10 times their size. They struck from impossible angles, diving through debris fields and asteroid clusters where normal pilots could not follow. They executed maneuvers that should have torn their ships apart, but their enhanced reflexes and merged consciousness with their machines made the impossible routine. Taijin himself destroyed over 200 swarm ships personally. His squadron accounted for thousands more. The swarm tried to adapt, sending specialized hunter ships after Ghost Squadron, but Taijin's pilots were too creative. They used tactics the swarm's organic computers could not predict, combining human intuition with machine precision in ways that confused and frustrated the enemy. The Allied ships proved their value again and again. The Velians fought with honor and discipline, their weapons technology superior to human designs. The Thryn used biological warfare that attacked the swarm's regeneration capabilities, creating wounds that could not heal. The Nari provided intelligence that allowed human forces to predict swarm movements and set ambushes, but even with these advantages, the swarm's numbers were overwhelming. They absorbed every loss and kept advancing. Their ships learned from each battle, adapting their tactics and defenses. The organic intelligence that controlled the swarm was ancient and experienced. Having consumed thousands of civilizations across the galaxy, Dr. Minho worked frantically in his laboratory on Europa, analyzing captured swarm biomass and searching for weaknesses. His team had access to data the Allied species shared, information about swarm biology gathered over decades of fighting. One pattern emerged that gave them hope. The swarm ships communicated through organic quantum networks, biological structures that functioned like neural pathways. Every swarm vessel was connected to every other vessel through these networks, creating a hive mind that coordinated attacks with perfect efficiency. If they could disrupt this network, the swarm's coordination would collapse, but generating a disruption, pulse powerful enough to affect hundreds of thousands of ships across the entire solar system required enormous energy. The only power source capable of it was the Solar Energy Collection System, massive arrays of mirrors and collectors orbiting the sun that provided energy for most of human civilization. Minho ran the calculations and discovered a terrible problem. To generate the required pulse, they would need to overload the entire collection system. The feedback would create a massive electromagnetic burst that would destroy half of Earth's orbital infrastructure. The habitats housing millions of people would be devastated. The damage would take decades to repair. He brought this information to Admiral Haijing, knowing the decision was beyond his authority. She listened to his presentation without emotion, studying the data carefully. Then she asked him one question: would it work? Minho hesitated, then answered honestly. He believed it would work, but he could not guarantee it. The theory was sound, but they had never tested anything on this scale. There was perhaps a 70% chance of success. Haijin looked at the tactical displays showing Earth, its orbital rings filled with civilians, and Mars, where billions more waited in terror. She thought about the alternative, letting the swarm reach Earth's surface, where no defense could stop them from consuming everything and everyone. The decision took her less than 30 seconds. She authorized the pulse. Then she sent emergency evacuation orders to every habitat that would be affected. Knowing there was not enough time to save everyone, but trying anyway, the preparations took 6 hours. During that time, the battle intensified as the swarm pushed harder toward Earth. Human forces fought with desperate courage, buying time for the civilians to evacuate and for Dr. Minho's team to prepare the pulse. Ghost Squadron held the line at the moon's orbit, their neural-linked fighters destroying swarm ships faster than seemed possible. Commander Taijin's voice came across all channels, calm and confident, encouraging his pilots and every other human fighter in the battle. They were making history, he told them. Future generations would remember this day. When the pulse activated, it was like a second sun igniting. The solar collectors released all their stored energy simultaneously, creating a wave of electromagnetic force that rippled outward from the sun. It reached the swarm fleet in seconds. The effect was immediate and devastating. Swarm ships across the entire solar system went chaotic. Without their quantum network, they lost coordination. Some ships attacked each other. Others drifted aimlessly, their organic computers unable to function independently. The hive mind that had made them so dangerous was shattered. Human and allied forces surged forward in a massive counterattack. Every ship that could still fight joined the assault. Even civilian vessels, hastily armed with whatever weapons could be mounted, entered the battle. It was humanity's moment of revenge, and they took it with fury, the cost was terrible. As Dr. Minho had predicted, the pulse's feedback destroyed massive sections of Earth's orbital infrastructure. Habitats burned or depressurized. Millions died in seconds. The survivors watched in horror from evacuation ships, seeing their homes and loved ones consumed by electromagnetic fire, but the swarm was dying too. Without coordination, they were vulnerable. The combined fleet destroyed thousands of swarm ships every hour. What had been an organized invasion became a slaughter. The swarm began to retreat, their remaining ships trying to flee back toward the Kuiper Belt. Admiral Hyjin ordered pursuit. She would not let them escape to rebuild and attack again. Human forces chased the fleeing swarm, destroying every ship they could catch. Commander Taijin's Ghost Squadron led the pursuit, their neural-linked reflexes perfect for hunting down panicked prey. Then something changed. Long-range sensors detected a massive energy signature emerging from faster-than-light travel. The readings were unlike anything they had seen before, larger than any ship in the database. The hive core appeared, a biological monstrosity the size of a small moon. It had been hanging back, controlling the invasion from a distance. Now it moved directly toward Earth, and nothing the combined fleet threw at it even scratched. Its adaptive armor the hive core's surface rippled and changed, evolving defenses against every weapon that hit it. Energy beams were abducted. Missiles were caught by organic tendrils and crushed. Railgun projectiles bounced off armor that hardened on impact. It was like trying to kill a living planet. Admiral Hyjin watched in growing despair as her most powerful weapons proved useless. The hive core was the swarm's true intelligence, the ancient consciousness that had consumed thousands of worlds. If it reached Earth, nothing would survive. Commander Taijin called her directly, bypassing normal communication protocols. He had a plan, he said, but it would require permission she might not want to give. She listened and her blood ran cold. Ghost Squadron could neural link to a captured swarm vessel, using its organic systems against the hive core. They could fly it directly into the core's cortex chamber, the biological brain that controlled everything. A zero-point bomb detonated inside the cortex would kill the hive core. But there was no way out. The pilots would die with it. Every member of Ghost Squadron had volunteered, Taijin told her. They knew what it meant. They had all made their peace with it. This was how they chose to serve humanity, how they chose to matter. Hyjin wanted to say no, to find another way, but she could see no alternative. She gave permission with tears in her eyes, something her crew had never seen before. Ghost Squadron captured a small swarm, ship and neural link to its organic systems. It was agonizing, their minds connecting to an alien consciousness that screamed and writhed, but they held on. They flew toward the hive core as every other ship in the solar system provided covering fire. The hive core's defenses focused on Ghost Squadron, sensing the captured ship as a threat. But Taijin and his pilots were too skilled, dodging organic weapons fire with precision that seemed superhuman. They reached the core's surface and dove into a cortex chamber entrance. Inside was horror beyond description, pulsing biological machinery and neural pathways the size of buildings. Ghost Squadron flew through it all, neural-linked not just to their ship but to each other, their last moments shared in perfect unity. The aftermath of the battle was devastating. Admiral Hyjin surveyed the damage reports and felt sick. Millions were dead, their lives sacrificed to save billions more. The orbital infrastructure around Earth was ruined, decades of construction destroyed in seconds. Mars had fared better, but even there, entire cities had been evacuated. Their populations traumatized by weeks of constant bombardment. The defense fleet had been reduced to less than half its original strength. Brave crews from dozens of nations and stations had given everything in the battle. Ghost Squadron's sacrifice was mourned across the entire solar system. Commander Taijin and his pilots became instant legends, their names spoken with reverence and tears. The allied species had suffered too. The Velians lost 40 ships and thousands of crew members. The Thrin, Nari, and Corvan forces had similar losses. They had defied their own government to help humanity, and many had paid with their lives. 3 days after the hive core's destruction, Long-range sensors detected something that made everyone nervous. Over 300 council ships were entering the solar system, a massive fleet displaying the official colors and symbols of the Galactic Council. Itself, Admiral Hyjin immediately went to battle stations. Her surviving ships took defensive positions, weapons charged and ready. If the Council had come to finish what the swarm started, humanity would make them pay dearly for it, but the Council fleet was not showing hostile intent. They sent diplomatic signals requesting permission to enter human space peacefully. The request itself was shocking. The Council had never asked permission for anything regarding humanity before. They had simply issued orders and enforced them. After consultation with Earth's government and her senior staff, Hyjin granted permission but kept every weapon locked on the Council vessels. If this was a trick, the Council would learn that humanity was not easy prey anymore. The Council delegation arrived at the rebuilt orbital station. Above Earth, leading them was Arbiter Velmuth, the same being who had delivered humanity's rejection 50 years ago. He looked older now, his feathers graying and his movements slower. To everyone's surprise, Captain Kang Daeun was also present. Now 93 years old and frail, he had insisted on being part of this meeting. The man who had represented humanity's hope 5 decades ago would be there to represent their strength now. The meeting took place in a large chamber designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. Velmuth floated at the center, surrounded by representatives from dozens of council species. Hyjin stood with Daeun, supported by Ambassador Yunji and other human officials. The allied species who had helped humanity were also present. Standing proudly with their human friends, Velmuth began with the traditional council greetings and formal acknowledgments. Hyjin cut him off. They had not come for ceremony, she said bluntly. If the council had something to say, they should say it plainly. The old arbiter was silent for a moment, then began what seemed like justifications. The council had believed humanity needed more time to mature. The quarantine had been for everyone's protection. They could not have predicted the swarm would target the solar system. Ambassador Yunji stepped forward, her young voice cutting through the diplomatic language with brutal honesty. She spoke of how the council had abandoned humanity to die, how they had knowingly withheld information about the swarm threat, how they had voted to let genocide happen rather than admit their judgment had been wrong. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some council members tried to deny it. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Then Chancellor Baikun spoke, his 3 eyes focused on Velmuth. He had brought evidence, he announced, and transmitted data files to every display in the room. The files showed recordings of council sessions where humanity's fate was discussed. The recordings proved everything Yunji had claimed. Council members debated whether to warn humanity about the swarm. Some argued for helping, but they were outvoted by species who saw the swarm as a convenient way to eliminate the human problem. There were even suggestions that if the swarm did not finish the job, the council should. The political fallout was immediate. Several council species announced they were withdrawing from the organization, disgusted by what had been revealed. Others called for reform and accountability. The progressive species demanded that those who had voted to abandon humanity face consequences. Velmuth watched his institution fracture in real time. The council he had served for centuries was tearing itself apart. Finally, he did something that shocked everyone present. He apologized. It was not a diplomatic apology, carefully worded to avoid admitting fault. It was genuine and complete. He acknowledged that the council had failed its own principles. He admitted they had wronged humanity grievously. He took personal responsibility for his role in the rejection and everything that followed, but Captain Daeun, speaking for Earth despite his advanced age, made it clear that apologies were not enough. His voice was weak but steady as he laid out humanity's terms for any future relationship with the Council. First, humanity demanded full Council membership with veto power over any future quarantine or military action against Earth. No species would ever have the power to imprison humanity again. Second, reparations. The species that voted to withhold intelligence about the swarm would pay for the reconstruction of what was destroyed and compensate the families of those who died. The cost would be enormous, but it was deserved. Third, technology sharing. All the knowledge and advancements that humanity had been denied during 50 years of isolation would be provided freely, allowing humans to catch up with the rest of the galaxy. Fourth Military Alliance. The United Earth Defense Fleet would be recognized as an independent force with the right to act in humanity's interests, including operations beyond the solar system. Fifth, accountability. Council members who knowingly endangered humanity would face justice, whatever form the reformed council decided appropriate. The demands were harsh, and many council species reacted with anger or shock. But Baikun and the allied species supported humanity completely. More importantly, progressive council members pointed out that humanity had earned these terms with blood and courage. They had survived what the council intended to destroy them. They deserved respect, not continued oppression. Dr. Minho, watching the proceedings remotely from his laboratory, added one more piece of leverage. During the battle, human scientists had captured and studied swarm technology. They now understood how to track swarm fleets and predict their movements. If the Council wanted this intelligence to save other worlds, they would negotiate in good faith. The discussions went on for weeks. Some Council species refused to accept human terms and left the negotiating table entirely. Others slowly came around, realizing that the galaxy had changed and they needed to change with it. A compromise was eventually reached, though it looked more like humanity's victory than a mutual agreement. The Council would be reformed with a new structure that prevented any single faction from dominating. The quarantine system would be abolished as a violation of sovereign rights. Humanity would join as full members with special provisions protecting their independence. Most significantly, a new joint defense force would be created to fight the swarm and other threats. Admiral Haijin was offered supreme command, and after careful consideration, she accepted. It would give her the power to ensure humanity was never abandoned again. The reparations were paid over the following years. Technology flowed into human hands, but much of it was already obsolete compared to what Dr. Minho's team had developed independently. The 50 years of isolation had forced human innovation to advance at rates the Council could barely comprehend. 20 years passed. The galaxy transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Humanity became a major power, not through conquest but through the respect they had earned. Their innovations spread through trade and cooperation. Ghost Squadron's neural link techniques were adapted by dozens of species, creating new generations of pilots across the galaxy. Human art and culture flourished in alien markets. Earth's music, literature, and philosophy found audiences among species that had once feared humanity's emotional nature. It turned out that what the Council had seen as dangerous volatility was actually creative passion that the galaxy had been missing. The swarm was pushed back to the galactic rim through coordinated efforts. The Joint Defense Force, combining human tactical innovation with Council resources and alien technology, won battles that had seemed impossible before. Humanity's contributions were undeniable, and even the species that had opposed them most strongly came to respect their capabilities. Admiral Haijin, now in her 70s, attended the dedication ceremony for a memorial station, built at the site of the Battle of the Kuiper Belt. The names of every person who died defending the solar system were inscribed on the hull in 100 languages, human and alien alike. Commander Taijin and Ghost Squadron were honored with special recognition, standing beside Haijin were officers from a dozen species. The young generation that had grown up after humanity's acceptance into the galaxy saw nothing strange about humans and aliens serving together. They took it for granted that humanity belonged among the stars.